The cold bit into Gemma Raines's skin as she pressed herself deeper into the velvet corner of the coach, praying the thick curtains would hide her from whoever was about to enter the vehicle just as dawn light began seeping across the cobblestones outside. She'd made a catastrophic mistake, the kind that gets street thieves killed in the old quarter of Ashenmoor, where the ancient rules still held power and modern law feared to tread. She'd been running from the night market guards after lifting a coin purse, not even a valuable one, just enough to eat for a week, when she'd spotted the coach parked in the shadowed alley behind the Crimson Hall. The door had been unlocked. She'd planned to hide for just a few minutes until the guards passed. That had been hours ago. She'd fallen asleep in the warmth, exhausted from 3 days of barely eating, and now the sky was lightening and someone was climbing into the coach with footsteps that sounded far too assured, far too elegant to belong to a driver. The vehicle dipped slightly under new weight. Gemma held her breath, making herself as small as possible behind the curtain, her heart hammering so hard she was certain it would give her away. "You can come out," a voice said, male with an accent that belonged to another century, smooth as aged wine and cold as winter moonlight. "I can hear your heartbeat, smell your fear. Hiding is pointless." Gemma's blood turned to ice. She knew that tone. Everyone in Ashenmoor knew what it meant when someone spoke with that particular combination of authority and otherworldly calm. She'd hidden herself in a vampire's coach. Not just any vampire, the coach's opulence suggested someone important. Slowly, hands shaking, she pushed aside the curtain and emerged from her hiding spot. The man sitting across from her made her breath catch despite her terror. He was exactly what the old stories promised, and somehow more. White hair fell past his shoulders in a cascade that caught the dim interior light like moonlight on snow. His skin held that same ethereal paleness, luminous and perfect as marble. He wore modern clothing, an impeccably tailored black suit, but somehow made it look like royal robes. His eyes were the color of dark garnets, ancient and knowing, fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel pinned in place like a butterfly in a collection. "I'm sorry," Gemma stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know I was hiding from the guards, and I didn't realize whose coach this was. I swear I'll leave right now." "Sit," he commanded, and though his voice wasn't raised, something in it made her body obey before her mind could catch up. She sank onto the plush seat, still pressed against the side as far from him as the coach's interior allowed. "You're running from guards?" I took something. Food money." She didn't know why she was being honest, except that lying to those eyes seemed impossible. "I'll give it back, please. I know the laws about trespassing on vampire property. I know the punishment, but I didn't mean to. I swear on anything you want." "Be silent," he said, not unkindly but with absolute authority. Gemma's mouth snapped shut. He studied her for a long moment, taking in her threadbare coat, the hollows under her cheekbones, the way she was shaking. "You're cold." Before she could respond, he was shrugging out of his long coat a beautiful thing of black wool and silk lining that probably cost more than she'd earn in a year. He held it out to her. Gemma stared at it like it might bite her. "Take it," he said. "Dawn is coming and I need to leave this district. The Crimson Hall's protections only extend so far. You'll freeze before we reach our destination if you don't." "Our destination?" Gemma's voice cracked. You're not going to kill me?" Something flickered in those ancient eyes, amusement perhaps, or curiosity. "If I wanted you dead, girl, you would be. Now take the coat. We're wasting time." Numbly, Gemma reached out and accepted the garment. It was heavy and warm, still carrying his scent, something like night-blooming jasmine and old parchment and cold rain. She wrapped it around herself as the coach lurched into motion with no visible driver. "Magic, then. Old magic." "What's your name?" he asked as they pulled out of the alley onto the main road. Outside, the city was just beginning to wake. Shopkeepers were opening their doors. Early morning vendors were setting up their carts. Normal life while Gemma sat in a vampire's coach wearing his coat and trying not to panic. "Gemma Raines," she managed. "Who are you?" His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. "You don't recognize me. Should I? Most would. Then again, most don't spend time stealing in the night markets. They attend the courts, the galas, the blood treaties." He leaned back in his seat, utterly relaxed despite the growing light outside. "I am Lucien Drakenheart, King of the Northern Territories and Lord of Ashenmoor." The blood drained from Gemma's face. The Vampire King. She'd hidden herself in the Vampire King's personal coach. Every story she'd ever heard about Lucien Drakenheart came rushing back: how he'd ruled for 3 centuries, how he'd unified the vampire courts under his banner, how he'd negotiated the uneasy peace between vampires and humans that kept Ashenmoor from tearing itself apart with blood feuds, how he was absolutely ruthless with those who broke his laws. "I'm dead," she whispered. "I'm so dead." "Dramatically inclined, aren't you?" Lucien said dryly. "If I intended to execute you for accidentally trespassing, I wouldn't have offered you my coat. That would be wasteful." "Then what are you going to do with me?" Gemma pulled the coat tighter around herself, both for warmth and as a kind of psychological shield. Why are you taking me anywhere? Just let me out and I'll disappear, I promise. You'll never see me again. I'm sure I wouldn't, given your clear talent for survival, he said, and there was something in his tone that might have been approval. But I find myself in need of something, and you've presented yourself at a convenient moment. Call it fate or fortune, I haven't decided which. The coach turned down a side street Gemma didn't recognize, heading toward the old district where the buildings got taller and the architecture more Gothic. The sun was rising now, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, but the windows of the coach had darkened somehow, keeping the interior in perpetual twilight. In need of what? Gemma asked warily. If you think I'm going to be someone's meal, peace, little thief. I have no shortage of willing donors. Lucien's eyes fixed on her again, considering, what I need is someone who can move through human spaces without drawing attention. Someone clever enough to survive on the streets. Someone who, quite frankly, no one would miss if things went poorly. That's encouraging, Gemma muttered before she could stop herself. Then she winced, waiting for the reprisal. Instead, Lucien's mouth quirked again. You have spirit. Good. You'll need it. He steepled his fingers, the gesture somehow both modern and ancient. There's a situation developing in the city. Someone is kidnapping humans from the lower districts, people like you, Gemma Raines, street dwellers, thieves, those on the margins. They're being taken to the vampire underground, but not by any house I control. This is rogue activity, and it threatens the treaty that keeps this city functioning. Gemma had heard rumors, girls disappearing from the shelters, boys vanishing from their street corners. She'd assumed it was the usual predation that happened in places like Ashenmoor, the kind that no one in power cared about because it happened to people no one valued. What do you need me for? She asked slowly. Bait, Lucien said simply. And eyes. You'll go into places I cannot during daylight. You'll ask questions among people who would never speak to a vampire. And if these rogues take you, you'll be able to identify where they operate from and report back to me. And if I don't survive being taken, then you'll have died as you likely would have anyway, cold, hungry, alone in an alley somewhere in Ashenmoor. At least this way, you have a chance at something better. He leaned forward. Work for me, Gemma Raines. Help me stop whoever is doing this. In exchange, I'll give you protection, shelter, food, and payment. When it's done, you'll have enough money to leave this city or stay in comfort, whichever you choose. It was insane, suicidal. Everything sensible in Gemma screamed at her to refuse, to demand he let her out immediately, to take her chances back on the streets, but she was so tired. Tired of being cold, of being hungry, of running. And there was something in Lucien's eyes when he talked about the missing people, anger. Yes, but also something that looked almost like genuine care. Like he actually minded that humans were being taken from his city. If I agree, she said carefully, I need your word that you won't just dispose of me when this is over, that I'll actually get what you promise. You have my word, Lucien said immediately. And a vampire king's word is binding, you know this. She did. It was part of the old laws, the magic that governed their kind. A king's sworn oath couldn't be broken without devastating personal cost. Then I'll do it, Gemma heard herself say. I'll help you. Lucien nodded once, satisfied. Good. We're here. The coach came to a stop in front of a building Gemma had never seen before, though she thought she knew every street in Ashenmoor. It was narrow and tall, squeezed between two larger structures, with dark windows and a door that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. The entire facade seemed to shimmer slightly, like heat distortion. Welcome to one of my safe houses, Lucien said, opening the coach door. The sun was fully up now, but shadows clung to the entrance of the building like loyal servants. Come, we have much to discuss, and you need proper food before we begin. Gemma stepped down from the coach, still wrapped in his coat, and followed the Vampire King into the strange building. The door opened at his touch without a key, and the interior was nothing like the exterior suggested. Where the outside had been aged and forgotten, the inside was elegant and warm dark wood paneling, soft lighting from sources she couldn't identify, furniture that looked antique but well-maintained. There are bedrooms upstairs, Lucien said, moving through the space with the easy grace of someone who belonged to it. Choose one. My staff will bring you food and proper clothing. Rest. Tonight, we'll begin your education. Gemma followed him down a hallway lined with paintings that she suspected were originals worth more than her entire neighborhood. If you're to work for me, you need to understand vampire politics, our social structure, what to look for and what to avoid. You need to know how to defend yourself against compulsion and basic blood magic. You need to know what questions to ask and how to ask them without arousing suspicion. He stopped at the base of a curved staircase, turning to look at her. In the warm light of the safe house, he was even more striking in human beauty that was both attractive and unsettling. This will be dangerous, Gemma. I won't lie to you about that, but I will prepare you as best I can. Why do you even care? The question burst out before she could stop it. About the missing humans, I mean. You're a king. You could ignore it, pretend it's not happening. It's not like anyone powerful cares about street thieves. Lucien was quiet for a long moment, his garnet eyes unreadable. I have ruled this territory for 300 years, he finally said. I have seen what happens when the powerful prey on the vulnerable without consequence. I have seen the blood feuds, the revolutions, the massacres that follow. The treaty between humans and vampires exists because I enforce it on both sides. And if I allow rogues to kidnap and kill humans with impunity, that treaty means nothing. The city will tear itself apart, and I will not permit that to happen. It was a practical answer, a political one. But Gemma thought she heard something else beneath it, something old and tired, and perhaps even sad. Besides, Lucien added, his tone lighter, I find I dislike the idea of someone operating in my territory without my knowledge or permission. Call it pride if you like. I'll call it territorial, Gemma said, and was rewarded with another of those almost smiles. Go, eat, sleep. I'll wake you after sunset. He turned to leave, then paused. And Gemma, thank you for agreeing to help. It matters. He was gone before she could respond, moving with that supernatural speed that left only a flutter of displaced air. Gemma stood in the hallway for a moment, processing everything that had happened in the last hour. She'd gone from hiding in a coach expecting death to being employed by the Vampire King himself. It was absurd, impossible. And yet the weight of his coat still around her shoulders and the warm, safe house surrounding her said it was all real. A woman appeared at the top of the stairs, middle-aged, human, wearing simple but nice clothing. Miss Raines? I'm Elena. I manage Lord Drakenheart's household. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your room and bring you breakfast. Gemma climbed the stairs on shaking legs, following Elena to a bedroom that was larger than any place she'd ever slept. There was an actual bed with clean sheets, a bathroom with hot running water, windows with heavy curtains to block out the day. Elena promised to return with food and clothes, then left her alone. Gemma sat on the edge of the bed, Lucien's coat still wrapped around her, and tried to understand what her life had become. She should have been terrified, should have been planning her escape. But instead, she found herself thinking about the way Lucien had looked at her, not with disgust or dismissal, but with something almost like respect. The way he'd given her his coat without hesitation. The genuine anger in his voice when he spoke about the missing humans. What have I gotten myself into? She whispered to the empty room. The room wisely didn't answer. Elena returned with food, real food, not the scraps Gemma was used to, and clothing that actually fit. Gemma ate until she was full for the first time in months. Then bathed in water so hot it made her skin pink, washing away weeks of street crime. She dressed in the soft clothes Elena had provided, practical pants and a warm sweater, sturdy boots, and finally let herself collapse into the bed. She meant to stay awake, to think through her situation and plan her next moves. But the moment her head hit the pillow, exhaustion dragged her under like a tide. She dreamed of white hair and garnet eyes and a voice like winter midnight saying her name. When Gemma woke, the room was dark except for a single lamp someone had turned on. A clock on the wall said it was 8 in the evening. She'd slept for almost 12 hours. A knock at the door made her sit up. Come in, she called, her voice rough with sleep. Lucien entered, and Gemma's breath caught. If he'd been striking in the coach at dawn, he was devastating now in his element. He wore different clothes, still black, still perfectly tailored, but somehow less modern and more timeless. His white hair was pulled back from his face, revealing the sharp angles of his features. He moved with that preternatural grace, and his eyes seemed to glow softly in the lamplight. You look rested, he observed. Good, we have work to do, come. Gemma scrambled out of bed, grateful she'd slept in the clothes rather than undressing. She followed Lucien down the stairs to a room she hadn't seen before, a study lined with books, with a large table in the center covered in maps and papers. The kidnapping started 3 months ago, Lucien said without preamble, gesturing to the papers. 17 humans taken that I know of, all from the lower districts, all with no family to report them missing or raise alarm. The pattern is careful, calculated. Whoever is doing this understands the city's social structure well enough to know exactly who to target. Gemma moved closer to study the map. Red marks indicated where each person had last been seen. They clustered in certain areas: the night markets, the shelter district, the industrial quarter where day laborers gathered. Have any of them been found? She asked. 2, dead, drained of blood, discarded in the river. Lucien's voice was cold as frost. Sloppy work, wasteful, and against every law of the treaty. So you think they're being taken, fed from, and killed? Most likely, though why remains unclear. If this were simply about feeding, there are countless willing donors in the city. Humans who offer blood for payment, who enjoy the sensation. This is something else. He pulled out another paper, this one covered in names and small portraits. These are the known rogue vampires in Ashenmoor. Ones who've rejected house allegiance, who operate outside my authority. Any of them could be responsible. Gemma studied the faces. They all had that same white-haired, pale-skinned beauty that marked their kind. but there was something different in their expressions: wildness, cruelty, a lack of the careful control she saw in Lucien. "How do I find them?" she asked. "You don't, not directly." Lucien moved around the table until he was standing beside her, close enough that she could feel the cold that radiated from him. Not uncomfortable, more like standing next to an open window on a winter night. "You let yourself be seen in the right places. The shelters, the corners where street workers gather, the night markets. You make yourself visible, vulnerable, and when someone approaches you, and they will because you fit the pattern perfectly, you go with them." "That's the bait part," Gemma said dryly. "And the eyes part? You'll be wearing this." He picked up what looked like a simple silver bracelet from the table. It spelled, "I'll be able to track your location and hear everything around you. If you're taken somewhere, I'll know. And I'll be able to find you, before or after they drain me." "Before." His voice was absolutely certain. "I won't let them kill you, Gemma. You have my word on that as well." She wanted to believe him. More than that, she found that she did believe him. There was something in the way he spoke, the way he looked at her, that made her trust he meant what he said. "All right," she said. "What else do I need to know?" They spent the next several hours going over everything. Lucien taught her about vampire houses and politics, how the territory was divided, which families owed allegiance to whom, the intricate web of debts and honors that governed their society. He taught her about compulsion, that subtle magic vampires used to influence human minds, and how to recognize when it was being used on her. "You can't fully defend against it," he admitted. "That takes training you don't have time for, but awareness helps. If someone makes you feel suddenly compliant, suddenly willing to do things you wouldn't normally do, that's compulsion. Fight it. Remember who you are and what you actually want. What if I can't fight it? Then you trust that I'm listening and will come for you." He held out the bracelet. "May I?" Gemma extended her wrist and Lucien fastened the silver band around it. His fingers were cold against her skin, but gentle. The touch sent an unexpected shiver through her that had nothing to do with temperature. "It won't come off unless I remove it," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "You'll feel a slight warmth from it always. That's how you'll know it's working. If something happens to me, if I'm incapacitated somehow, it will open on its own. But barring that, you're connected to me now." The idea should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt almost comforting, like having a lifeline in dark water. "When do we start?" Gemma asked. "Tomorrow night. You'll go to the shelter district first. There's a soup kitchen that operates after dark. Be seen there. Talk to people. Let it be known you're alone and looking for work. We'll continue that pattern for several nights if needed. Eventually, the rogues will notice you, and if they don't, they will." Lucien finally looked at her fully, and there was something fierce in his gaze. "You're exactly what they're looking for. Young, alone, no ties to anyone, they'll notice." Gemma wasn't sure if that was reassuring or terrifying. Probably both. "You should eat again," Lucien said, his tone gentling. "Keep your strength up. Elena will bring dinner. Tomorrow I'll teach you basic self-defense, not enough to fight a vampire, but enough to slow one down if necessary. For tonight, rest more. Read if you like. The library is yours to use." "Why are you being so kind to me?" The question escaped before Gemma could think better of it. "I'm no one. A thief you found in your coach. You could have just killed me or thrown me out and found someone else to be your bait." Lucien was quiet for a long moment, his ancient eyes studying her face as if trying to decide what truth to offer. "You remind me of someone," he finally said. "Someone I knew a long time ago. She had your same spirit, your same refusal to simply surrender to circumstance." His expression softened into something that might have been sadness. "She died because I wasn't paying attention to the right threats. Because I assumed the vulnerable were beneath notice. I won't make that mistake again." Before Gemma could respond, he turned and left the study, moving with that swift grace that was almost like disappearing. She stood alone among the maps and papers, her wrist warm where the bracelet rested, and felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. The days that followed fell into a strange rhythm. Gemma would wake in the late afternoon, eat the meals Elena prepared, and spend the evening training with Lucien. He taught her how to fall without injuring herself, how to break simple holds, where to strike if she needed to stun someone long enough to run. He taught her more about vampire society, the subtle hierarchies, the way to read power in their mannerisms and speech. He taught her about blood bonds and why she must never, under any circumstances, accept blood from a vampire's veins. "Drinking vampire blood creates a temporary bond," he explained during one session. "You'll feel euphoric at first. Then comes dependence. Then compulsion becomes much easier. In the old days, it's how we kept human servants loyal. It's outlawed under the treaty now, but rogues won't care about that." "What about a vampire drinking from a human?" Gemma asked. "Does that create a bond too?" "It can, if done repeatedly from the same person. Less powerful than blood sharing, but still significant." His eyes flickered to her throat, then quickly away. It's why most of us maintain rotating donors rather than feeding from the same humans regularly. Too much risk of attachment. Is that a bad thing, attachment? It can be. We live for centuries, Gemma. Humans live for decades. The math is cruel. He said it matter-of-factly, but she heard the weight behind it. How many times had he watched humans he cared about age and die while he remained unchanged? At night, she would venture into the city with Lucien watching from a distance. She went to the soup kitchens, the shelters, the corners where the desperate gathered. She talked to people, learning about their lives, their struggles, and she let herself be seen alone, vulnerable, perfect prey. 3 nights passed with no contact. Then 5, then a week. Maybe they've stopped. Gemma suggested one evening as she and Lucien reviewed the lack of progress in his study. Maybe they realized you were hunting them and went to ground, perhaps. But Lucien looked frustrated, his elegant fingers tapping against the table in a rare show of agitation. Or perhaps they're simply being more careful. Give it a few more nights. On the 9th night, everything changed. Gemma was walking back from a shelter in the industrial district, taking her time as Lucien had instructed. Make yourself visible. Don't hurry. Act like you have nowhere to be and no one waiting for you. The streets were mostly empty at this hour past midnight, but not yet dawn, just the occasional drunk stumbling home or night worker heading to a shift. She heard the footsteps behind her and felt the hairs on her neck rise. Not human footsteps, too light, too perfectly balanced. Vampire. Easy, Lucien's voice whispered in her ear. No, not in her ear, in her mind somehow through the bracelet. Don't run, let them approach. The vampire moved around to cut off her path and Gemma stopped. He was male, young-looking though probably decades or centuries old, with the characteristic white hair and pale skin. But where Lucien carried himself with controlled power, this one had a wild energy to him. Hungry energy. Out late, aren't you? He said, his voice trying for friendly and landing somewhere closer to predatory. Dangerous for a girl alone. I can take care of myself, Gemma said, putting a slight tremor in her voice. Scared but trying to be brave. Exactly the kind of response someone vulnerable would give. I'm sure you can. He moved closer. But it's cold, and you look hungry. I know a place warm, safe, with hot food. No strings attached. Just trying to help. Every instinct Gemma had screamed that this was a trap, that going anywhere with this vampire would be the last decision she ever made. But that was the point. That was the plan. I don't know, she said, infusing her voice with uncertainty. I don't even know you names, Marcus. And I'm with a group that helps people like you. Street folk who need a place to stay, a hot meal, maybe some work. His smile showed too many teeth. Come on, what have you got to lose? Everything, Gemma thought. But she nodded slowly, like she was being won over. Okay, just for some food though. Then I need to go. Of course. Marcus gestured down the street. This way. As she followed him, Gemma felt the bracelet warm on her wrist, Lucien acknowledging he was tracking her, that he knew what was happening. The silver band was her lifeline now, her only protection. Marcus led her through a maze of streets, heading deeper into the industrial district where the buildings were abandoned and the streetlights broken. Everything in Gemma screamed to run, but she forced herself to keep walking, to keep playing the part of someone naive enough to trust a stranger's promises. Finally, Marcus stopped in front of an old factory building. The windows were boarded up, the door rusted, but when he pushed it open, light spilled out from inside. After you, he said. Gemma stepped through the door and immediately knew she'd made a terrible mistake. The interior of the factory had been converted into something like a twisted parody of a shelter. There were cots lined up along one wall, but the people lying in them weren't resting. They were unconscious or barely conscious, pale and thin, with obvious bite marks on their throats and wrists. There were maybe a dozen humans there, all in various states of being drained. And there were vampires. 5 that Gemma could see, plus Marcus behind her. They looked up as she entered, their eyes glinting with interest. Fresh meat, one of them said, a woman with white hair and elaborate braids. Good. The others are almost used up. Terror slammed into Gemma. This wasn't just kidnapping. This was farming. They were keeping humans alive and feeding from them slowly, repeatedly, draining them to the edge of death over and over until there was nothing left. Lucien, she whispered, hoping the bracelet would pick it up. Lucien, they're keeping them alive. They're talking to yourself? Marcus had moved to block the door. That's not a good sign. Then again, I suppose it doesn't matter now. You're not leaving. The woman in braids stood and approached Gemma with a predatory grace. Let's see. Young, healthy, no track marks or major diseases from what I can smell. You'll last a while. Maybe a few weeks if we're careful. She reached out to touch Gemma's face. Gemma jerked back. The Vampire King will kill you for this, all of you. This violates the treaty. The vampires laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The Vampire King, the braided woman said mockingly, doesn't care about street rats. He's had 3 months to figure out what we're doing and he hasn't touched us. We're careful, we're smart, and we only take the humans no one misses. As far as Lucien Drakenheart is concerned, we don't exist. Then you're fools, a new voice said from the doorway, cold and terrible and utterly calm. Everyone in the room froze. Lucien stood in the entrance, and he was nothing like the controlled, almost gentle vampire Gemma had come to know. This was the Vampire King in full fury, and he was devastating. Power rolled off him in waves that made the air itself feel heavy. His eyes glowed like coals. The other vampires actually stepped back, instinctive fear overriding their bravado. "My lord," Marcus stammered. We weren't, you were torturing and killing my citizens," Lucien said, his voice cutting like a blade. "You were violating the treaty I enforce. You were operating in my territory without my permission." He moved into the room with that terrible grace. "Did you truly think I wouldn't notice? That I wouldn't care? They're just humans," the braided woman tried. "Just street trash. No one important, no one who matters. Everyone in my territory matters." Lucien's gaze swept over the unconscious humans on the cots, and something painful flickered across his face. "Every life is under my protection. That is the treaty. That is the law. We don't answer to you," another vampire snarled, trying to sound brave and failing. "We're rogues. We owe no house allegiance." "Then you have no house protection," Lucien said simply. "Which makes this very easy. Gemma, close your eyes." Gemma didn't hesitate. She slammed her eyes shut, turning away. What followed happened too fast for human eyes to track anyway. She heard movement, heard sounds that might have been screams or might have been something worse, heard things she didn't want to identify. It lasted maybe 30 seconds, then silence. "You can't open them," Lucien said quietly. Gemma turned back slowly. The rogue vampires were gone, not fled, but gone, completely. Nothing left but ash already dispersing in the air currents. Lucien stood in the center of the room, not a hair out of place, his clothing still pristine. Only his eyes still glowed with that terrible power. "Help me with the humans," he said, already moving toward the cots. "We need to get them to safety, get them medical attention." Gemma rushed to help, checking pulses and breathing. Most were alive but deeply unconscious. A few stirred when she touched them. "I've already called for assistance," Lucien said, his voice returning to its normal controlled tone. "My people will be here soon with vehicles and medical staff. These humans will recover. They'll be given treatment, shelter, compensation, and their memories will be adjusted so they don't have to carry the trauma of what was done to them." "You can do that?" Gemma asked, helping him carefully lift a young man who couldn't have been more than 20. "It's part of the treaty. Vampires who violate it forfeit their lives. Humans who are harmed by violations receive care and peace. It's not perfect justice, but it's what we can offer." Elena arrived with a team of humans and vampires working together, all wearing armbands that marked them as part of Lucien's household. They moved with efficient precision, carefully loading the victims into vehicles, administering first aid, taking notes. Gemma watched in amazement as the Vampire King's operation unfolded with military precision. "You've done this before," she said to Lucien as they stood to the side, watching his people work. "Too many times," he admitted quietly. "There are always rogues, always vampires who think the old ways were better, when humans were nothing but food and entertainment. I spend half my time hunting down operations like this and reminding my kind that we are bound by laws now, by honor, by the treaty that keeps us all alive. Does it ever get easier?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw centuries of weariness in his eyes. "Every time I find humans hurt like this, I wonder if the treaty was a mistake, if vampires and humans can truly coexist. Then I remember the alternative: endless war, rivers of blood, extinction for one side or both, and I keep fighting." Impulsively, Gemma reached out and took his cold hand in her warm one. "You saved them, you saved me, that matters." Lucien stared at their joined hands like he didn't quite know what to make of the gesture. "You were very brave tonight," he said after a moment. "Walking into danger, maintaining your composure even when you saw what they'd done. I'm impressed and grateful. I had you listening through the bracelet. I knew you'd come." She squeezed his hand gently. "I trusted you." Something shifted in his expression, surprise perhaps, or something deeper. "You shouldn't trust me so easily, Gemma Raines. I'm a monster like the ones I just killed." "No," she said firmly. "You're nothing like them. They saw humans as food. You see us as people worth protecting. That's not a small difference, it's everything." Before Lucien could respond, Elena approached. "My lord, the last of the victims is secured. We've searched the building and found records, names of other rogues who were supplying them with information about vulnerable humans. There's a wider network than we thought." Lucien's expression hardened. "Show me." They spent the next hour going through papers and a laptop the rogues had been using. Gemma watched as Lucien's jaw tightened with each new name, each new revelation of how deep the conspiracy went. "This will take time to unravel," he finally said. "Months, maybe. And I'll need someone who can move through both worlds, human and vampire. Someone the humans trust and the vampires underestimate." He looked at Gemma, the question clear in his eyes. "You want me to keep working for you," she said. "I want you to stay," he said it simply, but she heard the weight behind it. Not as bait anymore, as, I don't know the right term, assistant, consultant, someone who can help me understand the human side of my territory better, who can help me protect people more effectively. And if I said yes, Gemma asked carefully, what would that mean exactly? It would mean staying in my safe house, being part of my household, learning more about vampire society and politics so you can navigate them effectively. Working with me to root out threats like this before they can harm anyone. He paused. It would mean danger. Some vampires won't like a human having my ear, but it would also mean safety, comfort, purpose. A place to belong. A place to belong. When had Gemma last had that? She'd been alone on the streets for 2 years, ever since her grandmother had died and left her with nothing. She'd survived, but she'd never belonged anywhere. What about when this is all done? She asked. When we've caught all the rogues and fixed the problems. Then you choose, Lucien said. Stay or go, whatever you want. But until then, he looked away, something almost vulnerable in his expression. I find I would prefer you to stay. You're good at this, and you make me remember why I fight for the treaty in the first place. Gemma felt her heart do that complicated thing again, the flutter she'd been trying to ignore. All right, she said. I'll stay. I'll work with you. The smile Lucien gave her was small but genuine, and it transformed his face from coldly beautiful to something almost human. They left the factory as dawn approached, riding back to the safe house in Lucien's coach. Gemma sat across from him like that first morning, but everything felt different now. She wasn't terrified. She wasn't hiding. She was sitting openly, talking with the Vampire King about their plans for dismantling the rogue network, and it felt almost natural. You should rest, Lucien said as they arrived. It's been a long night. So should you, Gemma countered. When do you even sleep? Dawn to dusk like all my kind. The daylight hours are my rest. He walked her to the door of the safe house, lingering in the pre-dawn shadows. Thank you again, Gemma, for your courage tonight, for trusting me. Thank you for coming when I needed you, she replied, for keeping your word. They stood there for a moment, and Gemma became acutely aware of how close they were standing. Close enough that she could see the intricate pattern of color in his garnet eyes. Close enough to notice that despite his coldness, he somehow still made her feel warm. Good night, Gemma, Lucien said softly. Good night, Lucien. He was gone in a blur of movement, heading for wherever he spent his daylight hours. Gemma went inside, climbed the stairs to her room, and collapsed into bed with her mind spinning. She was working for the Vampire King, living in his house, helping him protect the city, and somehow, impossibly, she thought she might be starting to care about him as more than just an employer or protector. This is insane, she whispered to the ceiling. Absolutely insane. But she was smiling as she fell asleep. The weeks that followed were intense. Gemma became a regular fixture at Lucien's side as they worked to dismantle the rogue network. She learned to navigate vampire politics, sitting in on meetings with house leaders and helping Lucien understand the human perspective on various issues. She became his liaison to the human districts, checking on the victims from the factory, making sure they were recovering and receiving the care promised. She also spent more and more time simply talking with Lucien. Late-night conversations in his study about everything and nothing. He told her about his long life, the centuries of watching the world change, the loneliness of immortality, the weight of ruling. She told him about growing up in Ashenmoor, about losing her grandmother, about the strange freedom and terror of living on the streets. Did you ever want to be human again? She asked him one night. They were in the study as usual, a fire crackling in the hearth that Lucien didn't need but had lit for her comfort. I was never human, he said. I was born vampire. My kind are born, not made. It's one of the things your human myths get wrong. But I've sometimes envied humans, yes. Your capacity to change, to grow, to experience each moment is precious because you have so few of them. We vampires have eternity, and it makes us stagnant sometimes, resistant to change. You don't seem stagnant, Gemma said. You've created the treaty. You protect humans when you could just as easily see us as food. That takes willingness to change, perhaps. He looked at her across the table, firelight dancing in his ancient eyes. Or perhaps I've simply lived long enough to grow tired of blood. Why did you really give me your coat that first morning? The question had been nagging at Gemma for weeks. You said I reminded you of someone, but that's not the whole reason, is it? Lucien was quiet for a long moment. No, he finally admitted. The truth is, I was impressed. You were terrified. I could hear your heartbeat, smell your fear, but you didn't beg, didn't grovel. You apologized, offered restitution, but maintained your dignity. Most humans confronted by a vampire lose all composure. You didn't, and I found myself wanting to reward that bravery. So you hired me as bait? Gemma teased gently. I gave you a choice, Lucien corrected, which is more than most in your position receive, and I'm glad you chose to stay. Are you? She hadn't meant to ask it like that, soft, almost yearning, but it was out now. Yes, Lucien's gaze held hers. More than I should be, perhaps. It's dangerous for a king to have favorites. Gives enemies leverage. Do you have many enemies? Countless. Vampires who want my territory. Houses who disagree with the treaty. Rogues who hate that I enforce laws rather than allowing chaos. Humans who fear all vampires regardless of whether we follow the treaty or not. He gestured at the papers scattered across the table, reports from the ongoing investigation, names of suspects, evidence of the conspiracy. This situation is just one in an endless series of problems that require my attention. That sounds exhausting. It is. He rubbed his temple in a surprisingly human gesture of fatigue. Some days I wonder what would happen if I simply walked away. Let someone else rule. Let the houses fight among themselves for dominance. The city would tear itself apart, Gemma said quietly. The treaty would collapse. Humans and vampires would be at war again. You know that. I do. Which is why I don't walk away no matter how tempting it becomes. He looked at her again, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Though recently I've found I have an additional reason to stay. What reason? Gemma asked, though her heart was pounding because she thought she knew. You, Lucien said simply. I find myself looking forward to our conversations. To your perspective on matters. To the way you challenge my assumptions and make me think about things differently. I find myself concerned for your safety beyond simple responsibility, and I find myself wanting. He trailed off, shaking his head. Wanting what? Gemma pressed gently. Things I shouldn't want, things that complicate everything. He stood abruptly, moving to the window to look out at the night. You should rest, Gemma. We have meetings tomorrow with the northern houses. It was a clear dismissal, but Gemma didn't move. Instead, she stood and walked over to where he stood, close enough to feel that cold aura that surrounded him. Lucien, she said softly, what if I told you I've been feeling the same way? That I look forward to our conversations too? That I've started to care about you as more than just my employer? His shoulders tensed. Then I would tell you that's impossible. I'm a vampire, Gemma. I'm centuries old. I'm cold and dead and everything you're not. Any feelings you think you have are probably just gratitude or awe or don't. She stepped around to face him. Don't tell me what I feel. I know my own heart. And yes, you're a vampire. Yes, you're centuries old. But you're also kind and dedicated and honorable. You protect the vulnerable. You keep your word. You gave me your coat when you didn't have to. You saved my life, and somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as the terrifying vampire king and started seeing you as just Lucien. He stared at her, something raw and uncertain in his ancient eyes. If I allow myself to care for you the way I want to, it will make you a target. Every enemy I have will see you as weakness to exploit. Then we'll deal with that together, Gemma said. I'm not fragile. You know that. I walked into a nest of rogues for you. I think I can handle some political machinations. You don't understand the danger. I don't care. She reached up to touch his face, feeling the cold of his skin against her palm. I'm not asking for forever, Lucien. I know what you are and what I am. I know the time difference between us, but I'm asking for now. For whatever time we can have, don't push me away because you're afraid. Lucien's hand came up to cover hers, his cold fingers wrapping around her warm ones. I'm very afraid, he admitted quietly. I've lived 3 centuries, Gemma. I've seen countless humans come and go. I've learned not to let myself care too deeply because the pain of losing them is. He closed his eyes. I can't do this. I can't let myself love you, knowing I'll watch you age and die while I remain unchanged. The word love hung between them, acknowledged even as he tried to deny it. Then don't think about the ending, Gemma said, stepping closer until mere inches separated them. Think about now. Think about today. Isn't that how humans do it? We live in the moment because we have to. Maybe you could try that too. That's terrifying, Lucien said, but there was something almost like wonder in his voice. Good. Be terrified. Feel something besides duty and responsibility for once. She smiled up at him. Live a little, even if you're technically dead. That surprised a laugh out of him, a genuine warm sound that made him seem suddenly younger despite his ancient eyes. You're impossible. You like that about me. I do. His other hand came up to cup her face, his touch gentle, despite the strength she knew he possessed. God help me, Gemma Raines, but I do. Then he was kissing her, and Gemma's world narrowed to the sensation of cold lips against hers, gentle but insistent. She kissed him back, her hands sliding up to tangle in his long white hair, pulling him closer despite the temperature difference between them. He made a sound low in his throat, surprise or pleasure or both, and deepened the kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, well, Gemma was breathing hard. Lucien didn't technically need to breathe. They stood forehead to forehead. This is a terrible idea, Lucien murmured. The best ones usually are, Gemma replied. I'm going to be insufferably protective of you now. You already were. I'm going to worry constantly about your safety. I can handle it. I'm going to fall in love with you, and it's going to destroy me when you eventually leave. Then we'll deal with that when the time comes. She kissed him again, softer this time. For now, just be with me. Lucien gathered her into his arms, and despite his coldness, Gemma felt warmer than she had in years. They stood like that until dawn approached, and Lucien reluctantly pulled away. "I need to go," he said regretfully. "The sun." "I know." Gemma touched his face one more time. "Tonight, then. We'll talk more tonight." "Tonight," he agreed. Then, with that supernatural speed, he was gone. Gemma made her way upstairs to her room, touching her lips and smiling like an idiot. She was in love with the Vampire King. It was absurd, impossible, completely insane. It was also the most right thing she'd ever felt. The next few weeks were both wonderful and complicated. Gemma and Lucien continued their work dismantling the rogue network. They'd arrested 12 more vampires and freed 17 more human victims. But now their partnership had another dimension. Stolen kisses in the study when no one was around. Long conversations that lasted until dawn. Moments when Lucien would forget himself and hold her hand during meetings, or when Gemma would rest her head against his shoulder while they read through reports. The vampire houses noticed. Some approved seeing Lucien's human companion as evidence that he truly believed in the treaty. Others disapproved, viewing it as weakness or impropriety. And some began to see Gemma exactly as Lucien had feared, as a potential target. The first threat came in the form of a letter delivered to the safe house. Elena brought it to Gemma one afternoon, her face pale. "This was left on the doorstep," she said. "You should read it, and tell Lord Drakenheart." Gemma opened the envelope with shaking hands. The message was brief and brutal. "The human whore thinks she can own our king's heart. She's wrong. She's already dead. She just doesn't know it yet. No signature, no identifying marks." Gemma felt cold despite the warm room. "Well," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I guess the secret's out. My lord needs to know immediately," Elena said firmly. "This isn't something to handle on your own. He'll want to lock me away somewhere safe. Keep me hidden." "Can you blame him? You're being threatened." Gemma sighed. Elena was right. But she hated the idea of hiding, of letting faceless threats dictate her life. When Lucien rose that evening and found her in the study with the letter, his reaction was everything she'd expected and feared. The fury that rolled off him made the air pressure drop and the temperature plummet. "Who?" he said, his voice colder than she'd ever heard it. "Who dares threaten you?" "I don't know. No signature." Gemma handed him the letter. "Elena said it was left on the doorstep. Could be any of your enemies." Lucien read it, and his eyes began to glow that terrible red. "I will find whoever wrote this. I will make an example of them that will ensure no one ever threatens you again." Or Gemma said carefully, "We could use this as an opportunity. Let it be known that I'm going to the Northern Houses gathering next week as planned. Make me visible. See who takes the bait." "Absolutely not." Lucien's voice was flat. "You are not using yourself as bait again. I won't allow it." "You don't get to allow or not allow me to do things," Gemma said, feeling her own temper rise. "I'm not your possession, Lucien. I'm your partner. And as your partner, I'm telling you that hiding me away will only make me look weak. It'll make you look weak for protecting me. But if I show up at that gathering, stand by your side and dare anyone to try something. That's strength. That's you in danger. I'm always in danger. We both knew that when we started this, whatever this is between us." She moved to stand in front of him. "I'm not going to let threats dictate my life. And I'm not going to let them destroy what we're building, both the work with the treaty and what's happening between us personally." Lucien pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her like he could shield her from the world through sheer force of will. "I can't lose you," he said into her hair. "I know I said I wouldn't let myself care, but it's too late. I care. I care so much it terrifies me. And the thought of someone hurting you makes me want to burn the entire city to the ground." "Then don't let them hurt me," Gemma said simply. "Be with me at the gathering. Protect me the way I know you can. But don't cage me. I won't survive that way." He held her for a long moment, and she could feel the conflict in him, the desire to keep her safe warring with his respect for her autonomy. Finally he sighed. "All right, you'll come to the gathering, but you stay within arm's reach of me at all times. And you wear a protection charm, something stronger than the tracking bracelet. Elena knows a witch who can create one." "Deal," Gemma agreed. The week leading up to the gathering was tense. Lucien had his people investigating the threat, but they turned up nothing concrete. Meanwhile, Gemma worked with Elena and a witch named Margaret to create a protection charm, a pendant that would shield her from magical attacks and alert Lucien if someone tried to physically harm her. "He's really in love with you, isn't he?" Margaret said as she wove the spell into the silver pendant. She was an older woman human who'd been working with vampire houses for decades. "I've known Lord Drakenheart for 30 years. I've never seen him like this about anyone." "I'm in love with him too," Gemma admitted, "which is probably insane. Love usually is." Margaret smiled. "But for what it's worth, I think you're good for him. He's been alone a long time. Alone even when surrounded by people. It's good to see him actually living again instead of just existing." The night of the gathering arrived. Gemma, dressed in a gown Elena had procured deep sapphire blue that complemented her coloring. elegant but not flashy. The protection pendant rested against her throat. Her hair was swept up, leaving her neck exposed in a way that felt both vulnerable and defiant. Lucien appeared in her doorway, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "You're beautiful," he said softly. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Gemma replied. He wore formal attire, a suit that managed to look both modern and timeless, his white hair loose around his shoulders, every inch the Vampire King. He offered his arm and she took it, feeling the cool strength of him. "Remember," he said as they headed to the coach, "stay close, don't accept any food or drink unless I've verified it first. Don't go anywhere alone, and if you feel threatened in any way you tell me immediately." "Yes, Your Majesty," Gemma teased gently, and was rewarded with a slight smile. The gathering was held in a mansion in the Old District, one of the neutral territories where all houses could meet without claiming dominance. When they arrived, Gemma was struck by the sheer number of vampires present. Dozens of them, all with that distinctive white-haired, pale beauty, all dressed in finery, and all of them turned to stare as Lucien entered with Gemma on his arm. The whispers started immediately. Gemma held her head high, refusing to show fear or discomfort. She was here as Lucien's partner, she belonged. Lord Drakenheart, a male vampire, approached, his expression carefully neutral. Gemma recognized him from her studies. Lord Theron Nightshade, head of one of the Eastern houses, and guessed. "How unexpected." "Lady Gemma Raines is my advisor on human affairs," Lucien said smoothly. "As we're discussing matters that affect both humans and vampires tonight, her presence is not only appropriate but necessary." The use of lady was deliberate, elevating Gemma's status, making it clear she was under his direct protection. Gemma felt a flutter of gratitude and love for the gesture. "Of course," Lord Theron said, though his eyes said he didn't approve. "Please join us." The evening proceeded with painful formality. Gemma stood by Lucien's side as he discussed territory disputes, treaty violations, and political alliances. She contributed when asked, offering the human perspective on various issues, and noticed that some of the vampires actually listened. Others continued to view her with barely concealed disdain. It was during a break in the formal discussions, when vampires were socializing with drinks and quiet conversation, that the attack came. Gemma was standing slightly apart from Lucien, still within sight, but giving him space to have a private conversation with a house leader. She felt the protection pendant warm against her skin half a second before a female vampire appeared beside her. "So you're the human who thinks she can tame a king," the vampire said. She was beautiful and cruel-looking, with elaborate braids similar to the rogue in the factory. "You're even more pathetic in person than I imagined." "I don't think I've had the pleasure," Gemma said coolly, though her heart was racing. "I'm Lady Seraphine Nightborn, and I've decided you're a problem that needs to be eliminated." Her hand shot out inhumanly fast, reaching for Gemma's throat. The pendant flared hot, and suddenly Lucien was there, moving with that terrible speed, his hand wrapped around Seraphine's wrist. "Touch her and die," he said quietly. The entire room went silent. Every vampire present turned to watch. "She's just a human," Seraphine hissed. "A toy, a distraction." "She's making you weak." "She's mine," Lucien said, and the possessive growl in his voice made something in Gemma's stomach flutter even in the midst of danger. "And anyone who threatens what's mine threatens me directly. Is that clear enough, Lady Nightborn? Or do I need to demonstrate what happens to those who cross that line?" Seraphine paled, impressive given she was already white as snow. "I was just testing her, making sure she was worthy of you, my lord liar." Lucien released her wrist with enough force that she stumbled back. "You wrote the threat. Your handwriting is distinctive, I've seen it on enough letters. You thought to frighten Gemma into leaving. When that didn't work, you decided to take matters into your own hands." "I was protecting you," Seraphine insisted. "This human is none of your concern." Lucien's voice cut like a blade. "You have violated the treaty by threatening a human under my direct protection. You have violated your house oath by attacking in neutral territory. And you have personally insulted me by implying I don't know my own mind. Lady Nightborn, you are hereby banished from the Northern Territories. If you're found within my domain after tonight, the penalty is death. Lord Theron, as head of her house, you will ensure she complies or face sanctions yourself." Lord Theron bowed stiffly. "Of course, Lord Drakenheart, Lady Nightborn will be dealt with." Lucien turned back to Gemma, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Gemma said, though she was shaking. "The pendant worked, and you were here." "Always," he said quietly, for her ears alone. Then louder, addressing the room, "Let this be understood by all present. Lady Gemma Raines is under my personal protection. She is my advisor, my companion, and more valuable to me than any alliance or political convenience. Anyone who threatens her threatens me. Anyone who harms her will face my full wrath. Is that clear?" A chorus of acknowledgments filled the room. Some sounded genuine. Others sounded resentful. But all of them sounded understanding. Lucien offered Gemma his arm again. "I believe we're done here for the evening. Let's go home." They left the gathering amid whispers and stares. but Gemma walked with her head high. She'd faced down a hostile vampire in a room full of predators and survived. More than that, Lucien had publicly claimed her as important to him. In the coach on the way back, Gemma finally let herself react. She was shaking, adrenaline flooding her system now that the immediate danger had passed. "Here." Luce pulled her against him, wrapping his coat around her shoulders like that first morning. "You're safe, I have you." "That was terrifying," Gemma admitted. "You were magnificent," Lucien countered. "You stood your ground, didn't show fear even when she threatened you directly. I've seen vampires with centuries of experience who wouldn't have handled that as well. I had a good teacher." She burrowed into his side, seeking comfort in his solid presence. "And I knew you'd come. I always know you'll come." "Always," Lucien promised, pressing a kiss to her hair. "For as long as you want me, Gemma, I'll always come." They sat in silence for the rest of the ride, Gemma wrapped in his coat and arms, feeling safer than she had any right to feel given the night's events. Back at the safe house, Lucien insisted on personally checking every room, every window, every possible entrance. Elena had already increased security, but he double-checked it all anyway. Finally satisfied, he found Gemma in the library where she'd gone to try to calm her nerves with a book. "I'm sorry," he said from the doorway. Gemma looked up. "For what?" "For putting you in danger. For making you a target by caring about you. For not protecting you better." He moved into the room, looking more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. "Maybe Seraphine was right. Maybe I am weak where you're concerned. Maybe stop." Gemma stood and went to him. "You're not weak, you're human. I'm literally not, you know what I mean." She took his cold hands in her warm ones. "You have feelings, you care about people. That's not weakness, that's what makes you a good king. A good man, even if you are technically a vampire." Lucien pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "I'm so in love with you it terrifies me," he admitted. "I've spent 3 centuries avoiding this kind of attachment, and then you stumbled into my coach and destroyed every defense I'd built." "I love you too," Gemma said simply. "I know it's fast. I know it's complicated, but I love you." He kissed her then, deep and desperate, like she was air and he was drowning. Gemma kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring everything she felt into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, Lucien said, "There's something I need to tell you, something I've been avoiding because it complicates everything even more than it already is." "What?" Gemma asked, though a part of her thought she already knew. "There's a ritual, an old one not used often anymore. It allows a vampire to share their immortality with a human, not making them vampire but extending their life, slowing their aging. They would still be human in every way that matters, but they'd live for centuries rather than decades." Gemma's heart stopped. You're saying I could stay with you? Actually stay, not just for a handful of years? I'm saying it's possible. But..." He held up a hand before she could respond. "It's dangerous. The ritual fails sometimes, killing the human, and even when it succeeds, there are costs. You'd be tied to me. If I died, you'd die. You'd be giving up the natural human lifespan, the natural progression of life. You'd be choosing something profoundly unnatural." "How often does the ritual fail?" Gemma asked. 1 in 20 attempts, historically. "And it's been over a century since anyone tried it, so the true success rate might be different." "Those are better odds than I've faced on the streets," Gemma said. "I'm not afraid of the danger, Lucien. You should be. I'm afraid of it." His hands tightened on her shoulders. "If something went wrong, if I lost you because I was selfish enough to try this, then we wouldn't have tried at all, and you'd lose me to old age in 50 years anyway." Gemma cupped his face. "I understand the risks, and I'm telling you I want to try. I want to stay with you. Not just for a human lifespan, but for as long as possible. I love you. I want a life with you, a real one. Not just a few brief years before time tears us apart." "Gemma, unless you don't want that?" She suddenly felt uncertain. "Unless you're only telling me about this as a hypothetical. If you don't want me to stay that long." "I want it more than I've wanted anything in 3 centuries, Lucien said fiercely. "I want you by my side for all the years I have left. I want to wake each evening knowing you'll be there. I want to work with you, laugh with you, love you for as long as this world allows. But I need you to be sure, completely sure, because once it's done, there's no going back." "I'm sure," Gemma said without hesitation. "When can we do it?" "We need to wait until the rogue situation is completely resolved. The ritual requires preparation, resources, and most importantly, it requires I be at full strength and completely focused. I can't do it while we're still hunting threats." He kissed her softly. "But soon. Once we've cleared out the last of the conspiracy, once the city is stable, we'll do it. I promise. I'll hold you to that promise," Gemma said. They spent the rest of the night making plans not just for the ritual, but for their future together. What Gemma's role in Lucien's court would be long-term. How they would handle vampire politics as an openly mixed couple. Where they might travel once things were settled in Ashenmoor. It felt like hope, like possibility, like a future worth fighting for. The final confrontation with the rogue network came 2 months later. Lucien's investigation had finally traced the conspiracy back to its source, Lord Theron Nightshade himself, the same vampire who'd hosted the gathering where Seraphine had attacked Gemma. He'd been running the entire kidnapping and farming operation, using rogue vampires as disposable pawns while he profited from the illegal blood trade. He's been undermining the treaty from the beginning, Lucien said as he and Gemma reviewed the evidence. Every time I tried to strengthen protections for humans, he fought me. I thought it was political disagreement. I didn't realize he was actively profiting from human suffering. What happens now? Gemma asked. Now I formally challenge him before the High Council. If the evidence holds, and it will, he'll be stripped of his title and executed. His house will be absorbed into others, his territory redistributed. Lucien's eyes were hard. The treaty will be reinforced with harsher penalties for violations, and the humans who suffered will receive justice. The council meeting was held in the oldest part of Ashenmoor, in a chamber that predated the city itself. Gemma attended as Lucien's advisor, standing by his side as he presented the evidence to the assembled house leaders. The case was damning documents, testimony from rescued victims, financial records showing the blood trade profits. Lord Theron tried to deny it, tried to claim he was being framed, but the evidence was overwhelming. The penalty for treaty violation on this scale is death, the High Council's speaker pronounced. Lord Theron Nightshade, you are hereby sentenced to final execution. Your house is dissolved. Your assets are forfeit. Do you have anything to say? This is because of her, Theron spat, pointing at Gemma. The human whore who's corrupted our king's judgment. None of this would have happened if she hadn't. He didn't get to finish. Lucien moved with that terrible speed, and suddenly Theron was nothing but ash on the chamber floor. I was not going to listen to him insult my partner, Lucien said calmly to the stunned council. The evidence spoke. The sentence was passed. I carried it out. Are there any objections? Silence. Then slowly each house leader bowed their head in acknowledgement. The council concluded with new amendments to the treaty: stronger protections, harsher penalties, better oversight. Gemma contributed to the human welfare provisions, ensuring that victims of vampire violence would receive comprehensive care and compensation. As they left the ancient chamber, Gemma felt like she could finally breathe freely. The threat was ended. The conspiracy was dismantled. The city was safer. It's done, Lucien said quietly, taking her hand. The rogue network is destroyed. The treaty is stronger. And now we can do the ritual, Gemma finished. Are you still certain? He asked. You've seen the worst of vampire politics now. You know what you'd be binding yourself to. If you want to change your mind, I don't. Gemma squeezed his hand. I want this. I want you. I want the life we talked about. Lucien smiled, a real smile, full and genuine. Then let's begin preparations. The ritual took place 3 weeks later in the safe house, in a room that had been specially prepared with protective wards and ancient symbols. Elena was there, and Margaret the witch, and a few of Lucien's most trusted advisors. But it was primarily just Gemma and Lucien, facing each other in the center of the ritual circle. This will hurt, Lucien warned her one last time. My blood, my essence will fight against your human system at first. You need to endure it, push through it. If you reject the connection, the ritual fails. I won't reject it, Gemma said firmly. I trust you. I love you. I'm ready. Margaret began chanting in a language Gemma didn't recognize. The air in the room grew heavy with power. Lucien took Gemma's hand, bringing her wrist to his mouth. His fangs, which he normally kept carefully retracted around her, extended, and he bit down. The pain was sharp but brief. Then came a stranger sensation: coldness flowing into her veins, spreading from the bite outward. Lucien's blood, his essence, entering her system. Then Lucien offered his own wrist to her, a small cut already welling with dark blood. Drink, he said softly. Take my blood into you. Bind yourself to me. Gemma brought his wrist to her mouth and drank. The taste was strange copper and ice and something indefinably other. The coldness intensified, spreading through her whole body now. It felt like she was freezing from the inside out, like every cell was being rewritten. She wanted to scream, wanted to pull away. The pain was worse than anything she'd imagined, but she'd promised. She'd chosen this. She loved him. Gemma held on, drinking his blood, enduring the transformation, pouring every ounce of will she had into accepting the change rather than fighting it. Just when she thought she couldn't take anymore, something shifted. The pain began to recede. The coldness settled into something more manageable. And she felt it, a connection to Lucien, thrumming in her blood, tying them together in a way that was both physical and metaphysical. It's working, Margaret said, sounding awed. The bond is taking hold. Keep going. Lucien's hand cupped the back of Gemma's head, holding her gently as she drank. That's it, he murmured. You're doing beautifully, just a little more. Finally, Margaret called for them to stop. Lucien pulled his wrist away and Gemma released it, gasping. She felt different, lighter somehow, but also more substantial, more real, and she could feel Lucien in the back of her mind now, a presence that was both separate and part of her. How do you feel? He asked, his eyes searching her face anxiously. Like I've been turned inside out and put back together, Gemma managed. But good. I feel connected. The bond worked, Margaret confirmed, checking various instruments and readings. Gemma's life force is now tied to Lord Drakenheart's. Her aging will slow to match vampire timescales. She should live for centuries barring accident or violence. Relief flooded Lucien's face so powerfully that Gemma felt it through their new bond. He gathered her into his arms, holding her like something infinitely precious. You're all right. You survived. We're bound now. We're bound, Gemma agreed, holding him just as tightly. I'm yours and you're mine, and we have centuries. He kissed her then, and Gemma could taste his joy, his love, his relief through their connection. It was overwhelming and wonderful, and more than she'd ever dreamed possible. The next few days were an adjustment period. Gemma had to learn to manage the bond, how to sense Lucien's location and emotional state without being overwhelmed by it, how to shield her own thoughts when she needed privacy. She also noticed physical changes. She was stronger now, faster, her senses sharper. Not vampire level, but beyond normal human capabilities. You're essentially an enhanced human now, Margaret explained. The vampire blood has strengthened your body without changing your fundamental nature. You'll still need to eat, sleep, breathe, all the things vampires don't require. But you'll be harder to hurt, quicker to heal, and you'll age very slowly. How slowly? Gemma asked. A year of aging for every decade of life, roughly. So you'll look and feel like you're in your 20s for the next century or so. After that, aging becomes even slower. It was strange to think about. She was 21 now. In 100 years, she'd look maybe 30. In 200 years, perhaps 40. She would watch the world change, watch human friends grow old and die, watch centuries pass while she remained. But she'd be with Lucien. That made everything else worthwhile. 1 week after the ritual, Lucien called a formal gathering of all the vampire houses. Gemma, dressed in her finest clothes, a gown of deep crimson that Elena had commissioned, with the protection pendant at her throat, and Lucien's mark visible on her wrist where he'd bitten her during the ritual. You don't have to come if you don't want to, Lucien said as they prepared to leave. What I'm about to announce will cause controversy. Some vampires will be angry. It might be safer for you to stay here. If you think I'm missing you formally telling the entire vampire aristocracy that we're permanently bonded, you're very wrong, Gemma said firmly. I'm coming. We face this together. He smiled and offered his arm. Together, then. The gathering was even larger than the previous one. Every house leader, every significant vampire in the territory. They assembled in the great hall of Lucien's primary residence, a Gothic mansion in the heart of the old district that Gemma had never visited before. It was stunning, all soaring ceilings and ancient architecture and obvious wealth. This is where you actually live? She whispered to Lucien as they entered. When I need to project power and authority, yes, the safe house is more comfortable for daily life. He squeezed her hand. But this is where formal announcements are made, where history happens. They walked to the front of the hall together, and Gemma was acutely aware of every vampire eye on them. Lucien's advisors stood to the sides, Elena among them, providing silent support. I have called you here tonight for a formal announcement, Lucien began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the massive space. As you all know, Lady Gemma Raines has been working with me for several months to dismantle the rogue conspiracy and strengthen the treaty. She has proven herself invaluable in this work. She has also proven herself irreplaceable to me personally. Whispers started, but Lucien raised a hand and they fell silent. 1 week ago, Lady Gemma underwent the binding ritual with my blood. The ritual succeeded. She is now bound to me for the duration of my life. She will serve as my consort and co-regent, with full authority to speak and act on my behalf in matters of human welfare and treaty enforcement. The silence that followed was absolute. Shocked. Then a vampire Gemma didn't recognize stood. My lord, forgive me, but this is unprecedented. A human consort is one thing, but co-regent, giving a human authority over vampires? She doesn't have authority over vampires in vampire matters, Lucien said calmly. But in matters concerning humans, in matters of the treaty, her word will carry my full backing. This is not negotiable. Lady Gemma has proven her worth. She understands both human and vampire perspectives. She is uniquely positioned to help me govern fairly. But the binding ritual another vampire started is legal, ancient, and my personal choice. Lucien cut him off. I have bound myself to Lady Gemma willingly. Our lives are now intertwined. To threaten her is to threaten me. To disrespect her is to disrespect me. I expect every vampire in this territory to treat her with the honor and respect due my consort. Is that understood? Slowly, one by one, the vampires bowed. Some looked pleased, others looked resentful. But all of them acknowledged the reality. Lucien had made his choice, and his choice was absolute. Now, Lucien continued, we have work to do. The treaty needs to be fully implemented throughout the territory. Lady Gemma and I will be touring the districts over the coming months, meeting with both human and vampire communities, ensuring everyone understands the new protections and penalties. I expect full cooperation from all houses. The formal business of the gathering continued, but Gemma felt like she was floating. Co-regent, consort, publicly acknowledged and accepted. It was more than she'd dreamed possible after the gathering concluded and they'd endured countless congratulations and thinly veiled political probings. Lucien finally led her to his private chambers in the mansion. "This is really your home?" Gemma asked, looking around at the elegant bedroom with its massive bed and ancient furnishings. "Our home now, if you want it," Lucien said. "We can live here or at the safe house or anywhere you prefer. I have several properties throughout the territory." "I like the safe house," Gemma said. "It feels more like a home than a statement." "The safe house it is, then." He pulled her close. "Thank you for standing with me tonight. For binding yourself to me. For choosing this life." "Thank you for giving me a choice," Gemma countered. "For seeing me as a person worth caring about when I was just a thief hiding in your coach. Best decision I ever made, giving you my coat that morning," Lucien said with a smile. "You were expecting me to freeze to death otherwise. Very practical. I was already half in love with you and trying not to admit it." He kissed her softly. "The coat was an excuse to keep you close. Well, it worked." Gemma kissed him back. "I'm about as close as a person can get now." They stood there in their chambers, holding each other, feeling the bond between them thrumming with life and love and possibility. "What happens now?" Gemma asked eventually. "Now?" Lucien considered. "Now we live. We work to make the territory better. We face whatever challenges come together. We love each other for as many centuries as we're given. We build a life that's worth the risk you took." "That sounds perfect," Gemma said, and it was the years that followed were full of work, challenges, and joy. Gemma became an integral part of Lucien's government, working to improve human-vampire relations throughout the territory. She established shelters for vulnerable humans, created job training programs, set up systems to ensure no one slipped through the cracks the way she once had. When she encountered resistance from vampires who disliked her authority, she faced them with the same courage she'd shown that first night in the factory. And eventually even the skeptics came to respect her. She and Lucien traveled throughout the territory, visiting remote districts and establishing connections with communities that had previously been ignored. They faced threats: political rivals, rogue vampires who rejected the treaty, human supremacists who wanted all vampires dead. But they faced everything together, their bond making them stronger than either could be alone. And through it all they loved each other with an intensity that never faded. Every evening when Lucien woke, Gemma was there. Every dawn when he went to rest, she was the last thing he saw. Their bond meant they could sense each other's emotions, locate each other anywhere, share thoughts when they chose. It meant they were never truly apart. 10 years after that morning in the coach, on the anniversary of the day they'd met, Lucien found Gemma in the library of the safe house reading through reports. "Come with me," he said, offering his hand. "I want to show you something." She let him lead her up to the roof, where he'd somehow arranged a small garden despite them being in the heart of the city. Night-blooming flowers filled the space with sweet fragrance, and fairy lights provided gentle illumination. "It's beautiful," Gemma breathed. "I wanted to give you something," Lucien said. He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a ring silver with a blue stone that seemed to hold its own light. "In human tradition, this represents a formal engagement. I know we're already bound, already committed, but I wanted to honor your heritage, your humanity. Gemma Raines, will you marry me? Will you be not just my consort, but my wife?" Tears filled Gemma's eyes. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her deeply, holding her close as the night city spread out below them. They were married 1 month later in a ceremony that combined vampire and human traditions. Elena stood as Gemma's attendant, and several of Lucien's oldest advisors stood with him. Both humans and vampires attended, a visible symbol of the treaty's success and the bridge their relationship represented. As Gemma stood beside Lucien, exchanging vows in front of everyone who mattered to them, she thought about that desperate morning when she'd hidden in his coach expecting death. She thought about how terrified she'd been, how lost and alone. She wasn't alone anymore. She belonged to Lucien, to the city, to the work they were building together. She had a purpose, a partner, a love that would last for centuries. "I love you," Lucy murmured as they were pronounced bound in marriage, his ancient eyes warm with emotion. "My wife, my partner. My Gemma, I love you," she replied, kissing him as their assembled guests cheered. "My husband, my vampire king, my Lucien." It had all started with hiding in a coach at dawn, bracing for anger and receiving a coat instead. Now, a decade later, Gemma had a life she'd never dared dream of, full of love, purpose, danger, and joy. Full of endless tomorrows with the vampire who'd seen her worth when she'd had nothing. As they left the ceremony hand in hand, heading toward their future together, Gemma silently thanked whatever fate or fortune had led her to that coach on that desperate morning. It had been the luckiest mistake of her life, and their story, she knew, was just beginning. They had centuries ahead of them, centuries of work, of love, of building a better world together. Centuries of waking each evening knowing they had each other. Centuries of being partners in every sense of the word. The treaty would need constant defending. Rogues would always emerge. Political rivals would always scheme. But they would face it all together, bound by blood and love and choice. In the coach on the way back to the safe house, the same coach where they'd met, preserved by Lucien as a reminder, Gemma rested her head against her husband's shoulder and smiled. "What are you thinking?" Lucien asked, his arm around her. "I'm thinking that 10 years ago I was terrified when you found me hiding here. I thought I was going to die. And now? Now I'm thinking that this is where my life really began." She kissed his jaw softly. "Thank you for the coat, Lucien, for the kindness, for everything that followed." "Thank you for staying," he replied. "For choosing me, for choosing this life." "I'd choose it again," Gemma said. "Every time, in every lifetime." They rode through the night city together, vampire king and human consort, husband and wife, partners in all things. The city they protected spread out around them, full of both danger and hope, kept safe by their dedication to the treaty, to justice, to each other. And if sometimes Lucien's hand went to his coat pocket where he kept a faded memory of that first dawn, the receipt from having the coat cleaned, stained with blood from the factory raid, a reminder of the coat he'd given a terrified thief, well, that was between him and his memories. Some stories begin with grand gestures. Some begin with prophecies or magical destinies. Theirs had begun with a simple act of kindness on a cold dawn morning. A coat offered to someone who was cold. A chance given to someone who had none. A conversation started where there should have been only fear. From that simple beginning had grown a love that would last for centuries. A partnership that would reshape vampire-human relations. A life worth living, even in the face of danger and opposition. Gemma Raines had been a street thief with nothing. Now she was Lady Gemma Drakenheart, consort to the Vampire King, co-regent of the Northern Territories, and most importantly, a woman deeply and eternally loved. It had all started with hiding in a coach at dawn. It would continue for centuries to come. And every single moment, every challenge and joy would be worth it. Because she had chosen him, and he had chosen her, and together they were unstoppable. The city lights flickered past the coach windows as they headed home, and Gemma closed her eyes, content. The bracelet still rested on her wrist. She'd never removed it, even after the binding ritual. It was a reminder of trust, of the night he'd tracked her into danger and saved her. Now it was joined by a wedding ring, a symbol of human tradition honored by a vampire king. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness of the coach. "I love you," Lucien replied, his voice warm with certainty. Forever, forever was a long time, longer than any human should have. But Gemma had it now, and she would spend every moment of it loving this vampire who had given a frightened thief his coat and in doing so, had given her a future. Their story was complete, yet just beginning. The threat of rogues had been eliminated. The treaty was stronger than ever. The city was safer, and they had each other bound by blood and magic and choice, committed in every way that mattered. As the coach pulled up to the safe house they called home, Gemma thought about all the threads of their story, the danger they'd faced, the love they'd found, the life they'd built together. Every question had been answered, every threat resolved, every promise kept. She had been hiding, terrified, expecting anger or death. He had offered his coat and with it everything else, and now they had forever. It was the happiest ending Gemma could have imagined, and the beginning of a life that would span centuries. Together they would continue protecting the city, strengthening the treaty, and loving each other with an intensity that would never fade. The coach door opened and Lucien stepped out first, then offered his hand to help Gemma down. She took it as she always would, and together they walked into their home, into their future, into the endless night that was now theirs to share. Some love stories last a lifetime. Theirs would last far longer. And it had all started with a coat offered at dawn.